when you delve into it, it's like, well, we rely on them for, historical preservation of information, being able to go back to the way the internet was a decade or two ago, and seeing early iterations of websites. There's an accountability and a transparency aspect to it in terms of holding governments to account. Most media, if they change a news article, they're going to say that.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.
Hey folks, greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Spain, and fantastic to have Logan Ransley joining us. Logan is the co-founder of Landlord Studio, a tech startup based in Auckland. How are you, Logan?
Doing very well, thank you, Paul, and nice to be on the show again.
Yeah, great to have you back. Maybe you can remind listeners where you fit into this big, wide world of tech, what you do and so on.
Yeah, so I'm Logan Ransley, co-founder of Landlord Studio. We're a technology SaaS business out of Auckland, and we focus on providing tools for the DIY landlord vertical and space, mainly in the US and the UK, focusing on the accounting and also end-to-end property management for self-managing landlords.
Fantastic. Well, definitely looking forward to delving into a little bit more of the Landlord Studio story later on the show. I know there's a role there for artificial intelligence, and you're going to sort of share some of your expertise on that front that I think folks will find interesting. We'll come back to that. First of all, big thank you to our show partners, of course, 1NZ, 2 Degrees, Spark, HP, and Gorilla Technology. A big thank you to our show partners. And let's jump in. I think to start with, looking into some of the things that are happening with, I guess, a New Zealand perspective. First up, we've heard that an Auckland startup that use AI as part of what they do, List Assist, have secured a multi-year contract with Howard Hanna, and this, I believe, is the largest independent real estate broker in the United States, with over 15,000 agents and more than a million listings across the 13 states they operate in. And List Assist's AI tool allows users to search for property using natural language. Yeah, this sounds quite interesting. What are your thoughts, Logan, on this startup? I hadn't come across them previously.
Yeah, it's the first time I've heard about them as well. Quite interesting because, one, they're a New Zealand firm playing in the US. We also play in the US, it's our main market. But good to see another Kiwi business sort of tackling the real estate problem in the United States. It's a huge problem. There's millions and millions of properties that are listed on very few sites, such as Zillow, Zumpa, etc. And they typically have the majority of the market. So good to seeing some good Kiwi tech coming in and disrupting the market, especially using AI as a way to do that. And I think the second most interesting part there is the use of AI in this space. We are seeing more and more tech companies, including ourselves, starting to embrace AI to really help tenants find properties and particularly help them easily find exactly what they're looking for in terms of amenities using things like natural language. And we've played in the space to help landlords create listings with AI easily. And it's, definitely becoming more and more prevalent as we see the expansion and sort of progression of AI generally.
Mm. Now, look, one of the things that we do often sort of talk about is the shortcomings of AI versus the benefits of AI. There's been a big hype cycle, a lot of excitement around AI, but for a lot of organizations, they're looking and going, this isn't actually helpful. But I guess where I often will highlight sort of where AI is a really good fit is often within specific sectors, specific use cases. And it seems like you're using it. We've got List Assist that are using AI. I mean, where you've got a tool that's very specific to, to your sector or the work that an individual or a sector does, you can make that effort and build that sort of custom thing. I think often where the challenge is that, there's the capability, but unless you get something customized to your specific workflows and what you do, then often you're not really able to see much of an uplift. The jumping in and out of the likes of Copilot and ChatGPT and so on, outside of a kind of automation or outside of a nice tidy workflow, it can actually be quite frustrating.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, I mean, this is what we're seeing in the industry is there's just been this sort of massive bell curve of adoption of AI generally through ChatGPT, which is probably considered quite a generalized tool. Can do a lot of things, but it can't do things very specifically in the sort of context of a specific workflow. And so now you're seeing companies sort of adopt the GPT model inside their own products to help certain workflows and help improve the value out of those workflows. But I think we're still on this crux of, where is AI actually providing the most value in terms of tools specifically? And this is something we're experimenting with as well. And it's still something that I think we're quite early on in the journey. And most people are quite early on in the journey, just trying to figure out where the actual value is coming from when it comes to AI, and whether it takes control of tasks overall or it supplements sort of effort into those tasks to help sort of cut down on time overall.
Good, good. Interesting to hear your thoughts there. Also on the New Zealand front, there are ongoing issues when it comes to scam, when it comes to cybersecurity. We keep, we see this kind of continual uptick in issues in both areas, and it's good just to keep ourselves aware of what the issues are, so we can help and educate, well, first and foremost ourselves, but it tends to be that listeners to show like the New Zealand Tech Podcast are reasonably switched on and aware of these sorts of things, and are probably at the lower end of the likelihood to get scammed. But look, anybody is susceptible. Hit a person at the the wrong time. But often it's a matter of educating family members and those in our workforces and so on as well. So I thought it was interesting that we saw one news cover story, and it was an Auckland man who got hit with a pretty convincing scam that was involving New Zealand Post and a text message, and of course at this time of year, a lot of packages can be floating around, Christmas gifts and the like. So in this case, he'd sent off a parcel to a friend in Tauranga, received a text saying he got the wrong address. He'd need to correct it, or he'd be charged for the expense of the parcel being sent back, and basically was getting asked for a payment to sort of resolve this issue. And so there's just going to be more and more of these sorts of things coming. AI itself, unfortunately, is something that helps both, the good folks and the bad folks. So we look at those sort of past issues with spelling mistakes and grammar and so on. Bad folks can use AI to really, really personalize things. They can pull data in from a whole lot of sources. AI can generate and write an email, on a pretty personalized level, or a text message, or whatever method that the scam hits you from. So just a good reminder to be really cautious, and to let family members sort of know, to be aware of these things. And gift card, tax related scams, invoice scams, there are so many issues, but they do need to be on our radar. and talked about. But this was a new one to me. I hadn't heard of it. But yeah, this idea of lots of text messages going out, asking people to pay a bit more for a package to get to the destination because the address is wrong. You're going to get a percentage of people that are going to pay, and yeah, that's it's not ideal. And depending on how they do it, maybe they get hold of your credit card number, maybe they just take an individual payment. There are a range of possibilities that can happen. You don't want yourself or a family member or someone within your organization being hit with this stuff. So yeah, good to bring it to the forefront as we head towards Christmas.
Yeah, I think the scariest part is that we sort of look at the likes of AI as being, you know, it came in 2 years ago really hot, and we think that the adoption of it has been quite high, but we sort of have to remember that we sit within the tech community. And I think whilst AI has been embraced within the tech community, those that sit outside the tech community still don't really know what it's about and don't really know the capability and the power of AI generally. So when scammers start to use these tools to scam people who are not so tech savvy and more, susceptible to these types of attacks, then it can really have quite a negative impact. And I think the real opportunity here is for somebody to start looking at scams and start to use the AI for good to combat it for those who aren't, I guess, as tech savvy, and start to integrate it into everyday sort of people's workflows, etc., just to try, prevent a lot of this from happening.
Yeah. Look, and this is where I find it quite interesting that we are seeing progress from Apple, Microsoft, others who have access to I guess a broader access to our systems than a lot of other vendors. And the Apple Intelligence preview, I guess, has really kind of caught my attention from that perspective, because you can imagine if you're allowing an AI to read your text messages and to read, if that's happening kind of en masse, and so you can get some learning from that. There's a flip side from a privacy perspective, but and I'm sure we'll see continued moves across these big players, Google, Microsoft, Apple, Meta, and so on. But Apple seem to be really making some pretty strong moves. And because your investment when you're an Apple customer in terms of the hardware, this is also, it's all high margin stuff. There's subscriptions. This is something that certainly at this point in time, Apple seems more than happy just to include. Right, it's there out of the box. You're not paying, say, a Copilot, certainly a professional Copilot subscription. What is it, roughly $600 a year. So you think of that over the lifespan of, let's say you keep your phone for 3 years before you upgrade for an iPhone. If it were able to say match Copilot, and it was like, versus Copilot, actually no, I'll spend 3 years worth of Copilot funds on an $1,800 iPhone. There's going to be some interesting thinking and challenges as we see these big players really battle it out and start competing. But the way that Apple are working on Apple Intelligence, some of that is actually quite encouraging because of it being the way it's kind of baked into your mobile device, into Apple at an operating system level. Not necessarily every app is going to be able to leverage and take advantage of that, but yeah, I can see this will be a very fascinating area, I think, over the years ahead, once the kind of key players really step up a little bit more. And you've obviously got a lot of smaller players also who are trying to cover those general areas, right? Where the tools that we all use every day, our standard productivity tools, sending messages through varying platforms, emails, etc. And that's where Apple does have quite a strong position. because they run the operating system, and a lot of people will use an Apple browser, Apple for their messaging and email and so on. So we are in some ways quite early days, but it's great to see that there is some competition, and I think that's always so critical, and in some ways has become a little bit of an issue in some areas today. I think that there isn't enough competition.
Yeah, I actually think there's an opportunity for Apple here to build more trust within their consumer base, because they can actually start to offer more value added AI services that oversit things to help, you know, combat things like scams, and, help the average Joe with their workflows, etc. All based on, just sitting on the operating system of any Apple device. Yeah, so I actually think there's some massive amounts of value they could add, which could reduce, churn of their products into the competition. And it could extend all the way through the value chain, all the way through to payments, subscriptions, apps, everything. So yeah, I actually think it's good to see that they've started to embrace it and bring out new products. I was talking to somebody the other day about their Siri product and how Siri sort of came out, years ago. It's been on the products for a long, long time, and it's almost like they were too early. They the AI sort of revolution didn't start until much later, and they sort of had this product that never really got a lot of traction, and then it didn't really adapt with this new AI sort of revolution with the GPT, etc. So it's good to see that they're starting to actually overhaul their AI stuff, and hopefully we'll see that through some of the voice recognition type features they have.
Yeah, look, important to remember that there is a flip side as well, and of course, when you put that into somebody's personal device, what crossover does that mean in a business context, right? And you know, we've had some discussions on the podcast, people bringing varying devices into the workplace that can maybe record phone calls or record meetings and conversations, and this is where we don't always have the best delineation between workplace technologies and the consumer technologies, and they can bring some significant risks as well. So that's we won't let's not delve into that one. That's a big rabbit hole
We'll
in
leave that one
itself,
for
but
now.
just it's definitely worth mentioning it, and reminding on this, because there are there are some quite significant fish hooks. Now, another topic, and this one is equally relevant, to New Zealand as it is to the rest of the world. The Internet Archive went offline after a cyber attack, and look, it really got me thinking. How important is it that we have the Wayback Machine, that we have a place that holds an archive of information that's been on the internet, and actually is even what they've been doing good enough? How is it funded? What are the kind of the political kind of challenges? And if they've been knocked offline by one cyber attack, what does the future look like for the Internet Archive? And I guess stepping back a little bit further, is the Internet Archive, are they the right people to be archiving the internet? Everything I've heard about them in the past, as a non-profit entity in the US. I think they've been around 28 years now. They it's largely been pretty positive, but they operate on largely on the smell of an oily rag. The numbers I found online said their annual revenue something like 30 million US dollars, and in terms of their resiliency and all sorts of other things, there are a bunch of risks there. And I know they got hit, their headquarters in San Francisco got hit with a fire at one point, going back about 11 years. There's a whole lot of aspects to sort of maybe delve into and think about. Are they the right entity? Is the data that they hold sort of robust enough? But I guess when you delve into it, it's like, well, we rely on them for historical preservation of information, being able to go back to the way the internet was a decade or two ago, and seeing early iterations of websites. There's an accountability and a transparency aspect to it in terms of holding governments to account. Most media, if they change a news article, they're going to say that, but that doesn't always happen when somebody publishes something onto a social media platform, or maybe a government regime, or a less trustworthy media entity sort of changes some information. And not that the Internet Archive handles all of those situations perfectly, because I don't think it does. But as I started thinking more and more about it, it's like, hold on, there's actually a whole lot of really, really important considerations. And of course, each country and industry will tend to have different resources available, maybe alternatives to the Internet Archive. In New Zealand, we've had the government archives for a long time. Archives New Zealand, archives.gov.nz. There's the National Library of New Zealand, where they've archived a whole bunch of stuff. But just in the last few months, we heard about Archives New Zealand shutting down their digitisation program. And I think it might have been under Archives New Zealand, where I'm not sure how far we go back, maybe 5 years or so. There was an entity there that was archiving a lot of digital information, and they were asking permission to archive off copies of the New Zealand Tech Podcast, the New Zealand Business Podcast, some of the other podcasts we were producing. And yeah, that in itself could be really, really important. A lot of podcasts already are completely inaccessible. Past podcasts, they're gone. They were freely available, but very, very hard to find today. So I think that there's actually a fair bit in there when we think about the need to hold on to these things. And I guess there's a whole lot of kind of cultural artifacts that are in a digital form. One of the other areas is censorship. So keeping archives as varying pressures kind of come to change things, being able to look back at what was online in a past time. And there's all sorts of other aspects, I guess, from a legal perspective, a journalistic perspective, maybe even training AI systems, right? They've got to have access to data, although that in itself has some challenges. So there's a number of other aspects to delve into there. What are your thoughts, Logan, in terms of the importance of having these digital archives, and is it actually something that as society we've maybe just kind of taken for granted that there's a few entities that look after it, but maybe we need to take it a bit more seriously?
Yeah, the cyber attack almost reminds me of the loss of information during like the Iron Age, right? Um,
Mm.
where there was destruction of knowledge and history and learnings back in the day. Um, it's kind of like that, which is not a great thing at all. Yeah, I think that sort of oily rag metaphor you were giving before is a little bit worrying. It sort of sits on a knife edge, and I actually personally think the archive is quite important for obviously preserving a lot of information that's happened. And perhaps there's some people that want that information gone, and that may be information about them personally or about political figures or anything. And perhaps that's some motivation behind the cyber attacks, is to take that sort of information down so that people can't go reference it in their journalism and citation, etc. And that's a little bit worrying, because you want transparency and you want people to know truth and fact. So I think having a sort of single source of truth is a really good idea, but it also is an issue because it is susceptible. If there is a single source of truth that can be taken down, then it means that it is more susceptible to losing that information long term. And I guess the internet itself is inherently has a lot of redundancy, right? You can't just take the internet down from one source. And so if there's a way to build that sort of same structure into a source of truth where information can exist, and or it's particularly historical information can exist in lots of places, it's probably the most ideal outcome. But
I can
yeah,
hear
I
some
think
people in my head shouting the blockchain, the blockchain, the blockchain.
the
Um,
blockchain, yeah. Yeah, I
the,
mean that's a
the,
great use case for
Yeah,
this, right?
yeah. So you can see there could
Um,
be an element in there, but there's
yeah,
also a flip side to the blockchain is there's a cost to run all these, all these sorts of things, and blockchain isn't
yeah.
necessarily the most efficient. But in terms of, I think, that element of consistency, right, and of being able to stop people to mess with it, which is probably one of the concerns. Yeah, a blockchain approach could be super helpful.
Yeah, having information shared across multiple sources is probably the most ideal outcome. I can't remember which movie it is, but there's this scene where information shared across every single person's personal device, fragmented, almost like a RAID drive where information is across multiple different sources, but ultimately can be viewed and accessed from a single location. Through a browser, etc. And maybe that's the sort of future that we're going towards. But I guess coming back to sort of the importance of having that information from a historical perspective, I think it is important, and I think we need to maintain that sort of integrity so that people can always go back and see the learnings from the past, see truth and fact, so that they can reference it and fact check as well. So
Yeah, I guess there's an element of crossover here into sort of free speech type discussions and so on, which obviously can get complicated because there are scenarios in which information shouldn't necessarily be shared and so on, and we have that when there's a court case going on, and in order to avoid sort of bias and what have you, sometimes names will be kept out of the media for that sort of reason, or for other reasons, and so on. So yeah, again, some of these things bring some complications, but yeah, largely I think this is an area that probably needs more attention and more thought. Obviously, there are a chunk of people, a bunch of people that think about this stuff a lot more than I do, and why we've got things like this, New Zealand Web Archive and the like. But yeah, we probably need to be doing more of it, not less. And yeah, I think there are potentially some significant challenges in terms of, I know, yeah, getting the right level or the appropriate approach from a political perspective that can be kind of sound and solid and consistent, because you land on something, and then different countries flip their viewpoints as governments change and so on, and you can be back in the same boat where some legislation comes in and a whole lot of history gets kicked to the curb, and we can think of controversial things around the world. Tiananmen Square is probably one of the ones that often comes up in discussions. And yeah, you can imagine that's an area that what some countries would be happy having archived and available free for all. That's probably not going to pass the test, and or that example in China, for instance. So these things do have complexities once you start putting sort of politics and different ideologies into play. But yeah, I think important that we keep these things on the radar, and we fight for really really good outcomes, because yeah, the loss of knowledge you know can be pretty devastating at times, and it's more than just, probably a lot more than just a nice to have, certainly in some parts of the world in some situations.
yeah,
Now, other topics. Apple, I understand, are expanding their satellite services with Global Star. Now, we have been a little bit limited with access to Apple's, I guess, there's full kind of satellite capabilities in New Zealand. I did have a little bit of a play while I was in the US where you can send, text messages when you're outside of coverage in the US. And yeah, Apple have invested, it was 1.1 billion US dollars into Global Star. So they've taken a 20% stake there, and they're expanding that partnership. So this is interesting to see, because I guess the difference between, say, what we're getting coming in from our local telecommunications providers through the partnerships that they have. So, the likes of Starlink and Lynx, which are the two services across our New Zealand telcos. So Lynx being used by 2 Degrees and Spark, or Link, and then Starlink, being used for mobile to satellite comms by One NZ, at least initially, an exclusive partnership there. But my understanding is the range that these types of services operate in is kind of kept open, and is largely free. So you do have a potential, certainly for some comms, for this to kind of, I guess, operate a little bit like, Wi-Fi, and you don't necessarily need to, as far as I'm aware, have a carrier with, you know, with a dedicated spectrum that they've purchased, in this type of scenario anyway. Actually, I probably should look that up and actually check that I'm correct on that one. But the fact that Apple are offering these services in a whole range of countries would suggest me to think that is largely the case, that between them and Global Star, they haven't gone out and bought spectrum like our mobile carriers do. Now that creates some limitations. So if you just want to do a call on your normal network, and or a text and so on, yeah, that's not necessarily going to 100% work. But of course, if you're doing trying to send an emergency message, and there are a range of things, say using the iOS's messaging or Apple's messaging capabilities with iMessage, or trigger certain sorts of services, there are ways that they can technically make all that work without you connecting into your full carrier. But it probably does trigger some people's thinking around are we coming to a day that you'll be able to do a satellite-based communication, or the satellite communications will be so good that they are able to compete directly as a completely alternative offering, compared to what we would buy from our local telcos today. And I can imagine for some people, the way Global Star operates could maybe fall into that category. Yeah. What are your thoughts on this sort of expansion? Is it something that sort of interests you much? Because I guess 99.9% of the time, for most of us, we're inside a region that's got good mobile coverage. Our plans are pretty reasonable, reasonably and competitive in many ways. We've got good performance, and a really full set of services, fast broadband and so on, which none of these providers can offer to customers today. And they're certainly not doing a direct compete with our the mobile communications carriers.
Yeah, not yet. Anyways, this is kind of like when Starlink first sort of came out, and they conveyed that they were quite small when they first came out, and their pitch wasn't sort of world domination in the internet space. And over time, as they've deployed more and more satellites, now they're marketing in every single place. And in New Zealand, they're spending a lot of money in marketing towards sort of those farm type customers where access is limited. But I have a suspicion that Apple's seen the rollout of Starlink and just how successful it's been, and sort of given them almost a strategic insight to say we actually might be able to play in this space where we can actually operate and compete with local telcos in all these different countries, because ultimately it could be a huge potential revenue span for them. And although they've sort of rolled it out initially as, I guess, a way to do things like the emergency SOS feature and, cater for lacking in cellular coverage just to extend some of their functionality, I do think long term there is a potential strategic play here, and actually a way for them to generate a lot of revenue by expanding into, offering a full carrier service essentially. So you don't need to rely on the likes of other local telcos. But we will see. I guess that's just just a possibility at the moment.
Mm. Yeah, I've just did a little bit of quick look up, and in the US, Global Star does hold licenses for some spectrum in the 1600 megahertz and sort of 2500 megahertz range. So one for uplink, the other for downlink. So it's the L band and the S band as it's referred to, and this is specifically for mobile satellite services, including voice and data communications. And the Federal Communications Commission has authorized them to use their S-band spectrum for this purpose. I'm not seeing anything around Global Star having any terrestrial spectrum rights in New Zealand. So there's probably a lot more info here. There'll be someone that's delved into a lot more. This might have been. Well, we've talked about this with Bill Bennett before, who's usually well across the telecommunications thing. So might have to delve in and ask him a few sort of harder and further questions on this topic. But it will be really interesting to see how it's evolving. But I guess what I'm seeing from that quick look is it's there probably is a reasonable amount of complexity to it, but you can imagine if Apple's investing in this, they're very keen to make their the satellite communications capabilities something of a differentiator. And because of the margins that they make on selling their devices, it's a bit of a different scenario for the likes of Google and Samsung in terms of margins. So this could be an area where really Apple push to differentiate themselves, compared to others. And it could well just be another thing that helps make their overall ecosystem pretty sticky for for customers, right?
Yeah, and another thing is well, a sort of an interesting play is the One and Starlink partnership that happened earlier. I think it was last year, and I know they're playing in the sort of IoT space, but I think what we're seeing as a trend overall is this sort of satellite-based technology starting to become more and more prevalent, particularly with the telcos. And so I guess over time, as we sort of see this whole thing roll out and develop, I suspect that it's going to have an impact on sort of consumer behavior and the way that sort of telco type services are brought to our mobile phones, for instance. I know Elon Musk has sort of you know inf- sort of indicated or said that he'd like to bring out his own mobile device with Tesla, and whether that is a just sort of side comment or an actual reality, who knows? But
Yeah.
I guess the direct to cell service is something that is quite interesting and probably worth keeping an eye on.
Yeah. Well, on that basis, I see a bunch of the One NZ team have been up, visiting SpaceX after some successful trialing of the Starlink direct to cell, for sending SMSs. And at this point, well, that's what they've talked about publicly, is using it for SMS. New Zealand, I think it was New Zealand and Japan, are the two markets internationally where the Starlink satellite to mobile service, has been given the tick from a testing perspective. So that has happened. And those that are the Warriors fans might be familiar with up the wires, as as the terminology that is often used to support the Warriors, and that was, we are told, the very first text message. So, of course, One NZ being big supporters and sponsor of the Warriors. So, if you're into your league there, you might find that interesting. So, look, good on One NZ and Starlink working together and getting that moving along. Interestingly, they're not the first to have tested this sort of technology in New Zealand, but of course SpaceX are really moving at a pace that you know will I think be quite astonishing in terms of just the number of direct to cell sites that they've put up in orbit now, which I think I don't know, last count was maybe in the direction of 300, somewhere between two and 300, I think. So that's going very, 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 very fast, and will change the whole playing field, I guess, over the year or two ahead. But yeah, and of course there are other players, and of course we're watching to see what Sir Peter Beck and the Rocket Lab team will have up their sleeve. They're very much talking around the future of Rocket Lab's business, having some similarities to that of SpaceX, and of them, potentially having their own, satellite constellation or constellations that will, target particular areas. So that is something that we will continue to watch, and that there's been some very interesting content coming through recently around Rocket Lab as they work towards establishing the next phase of the business, and new launch vehicle, and so on.
Yeah, I'm excited to see their self-landing rocket.
Oh yes, yes, yeah. That stuff's looking pretty cool, isn't it? Okay, so on to just our final topic before we get in and delve into what's happening in the world of Landlord Studio. Really interesting to hear about these new solar panels that they're calling hydro panels that take moisture out of the air and convert it to drinking water. So the ABC News in Australia were covering this, and they're basically saying these new panels can effectively create or retrieve water in areas where fresh drinking water is probably reasonably hard or expensive to come by. Yeah, the hydro panels in use at, excuse my pronunciation, Gaduga Central School in New South Wales. So this is a school, and they're producing 50 litres of drinkable water daily by extracting moisture, from the air using these panels. So they're basically ending up with clean, safe, chilled water, and taking it out of the air. So just thought that's a cool innovation, some good use of technology, and you can imagine there's a bunch of places around the world where this sort of approach could be really helpful. I'm not sure in that location how much 50 liters of drinking water a day does, but when you think of that across a year or even across a week, that's it's starting to be a reasonable chunk of water. So really cool.
Yeah, that's interesting technology actually. I think that's very useful for, I mean, any sort of progressions in technology around, basic human needs such as these is really promising and encouraging to hear.
Yeah. Now let's delve in. I'm keen to get an update, and for listeners that aren't familiar with Landlord Studio, when did Landlord Studio sort of kick off, and what's kind of a summary of your progress to date in terms of funding rounds and what you built?
Yeah, so Landlord Studio, obviously property management software for DIY landlords. We focus on the accounting and bookkeeping, financial piece, and also the end-to-end management for landlords. We started in 2018, and we operate primarily across the US and the UK. Funding rounds for us have been pretty light, actually. We've been very conservative with the way that we spend money, so we haven't actually had to, raise a lot of cash, which has been good. And because we're up against some very competitive businesses in the US that have lots of money. I actually think we've made some really significant progress in the way that we've raised versus the way that the US companies have raised and spent. And so our last funding round was about 3 years ago. We're now a profitable company, over 15 staff, and expanding as well.
And what's next? I know there's some AI elements to where you've been going and some of the work you've been doing, and there's also the United Kingdom is becoming a pretty important market for you. So yeah, maybe you can walk us through that and what are the changes ahead?
Yeah, going into that sort of next scale up phase and looking at the UK next year, there's quite a significant opportunity for us where we see our business. And this is all around the sort of digital tax compliance changes that the UK government are bringing in. So, UK government is effectively overhauling their entire tax system, making it digital by default, quite similar to actually New Zealand's tax system. They've actually taken a lot of the learnings from New Zealand and applied it to the UK and the way that people do tax here. People record their financials and then submit it through government systems, etc. And so what they're doing in the UK is effectively mandating digital tax returns for self-employed sole traders and landlords earning over a certain threshold in their business. And it's going to affect millions of people, actually. I mean, in the landlord segment alone, it's going to affect up to 2.8 million landlords eventually. And yeah, so it's a very significant change happening in the UK. The new government that's in the UK has just done their budget announcement 31st of October, and they've made a promise to basically push ahead with this taxation change, investing more into it actually, and trying to fast track this with their sort of ambitions to hike taxes and sort of overhaul some of the public services as well.
Does that mean potentially a big scale up for you if landlords are really going to need to, double down on having their own technology platforms for managing their property and their taxes?
Yeah, it's significant opportunity. Probably one that doesn't come around very often, especially for the software technology companies like ours. A government mandation is always a great sort of tailwind for anybody. But yeah, up to 2.85 million landlords are going to have to use digital tax solutions within the next sort of 5 years. In the first 2 years alone, it's about 50% of that. So about a million landlords coming on to digital tax accounting solutions in 2026. So next year is going to be a big year of selling through accountants and sort of all things financial and tax related. So yeah, it's going to be a big year. We're planning our expansion next year, and we'll be essentially going after the landlord segment as well. Yeah, it's very exciting.
Fantastic, fantastic. So when do you pack your bags and leave for London or Birmingham or Glasgow,
Yeah,
wherever you're going to be based?
Q1 is when we're expanding over there. I mean, we have a UK entity already, so it's just a simple relocation of people more so than the business itself. So yeah, it's exciting, but we'll basically be starting our activity from the new tax year, starting April 1st, and sort of extending all the way through to the following tax year.
Fantastic. Now, AI, we teased a little bit. This has been an area you've been working on. What can you share from from your learnings and experience, and what you've been working on building?
Yeah, so we're trying to focus our AI in a value added way. So, as I sort of mentioned before, there's a lot of AI tools, but we're really trying to figure out where the value add is in that AI rather than just having it for the sake of having it. The two areas we've found where we are going to start to explore and build upon is the accounting side. So, AI value added services around accounting, particularly around the consultation part, where landlords particularly can figure out how to structure and make the most out of their portfolios, etc. But also in, categorization of expenses and things that is going to help their tax return at the end of the day. So there's a lot of work we're doing in that area, particularly from the AI front, but also analysis of portfolio, benchmarking to basically give landlords more insight into how much they should be spending versus how much they are spending, and sort of benchmarking based on portfolios that exist in certain geographical areas. For instance, this is how much you should be earning, this is the vacancy rates, this is the types of expenses, this is all that sort of financial insight where we're starting to roll out and explore. And then the property listing side as well. So some of those more sort of top level value added AI services. So helping generate listings, helping with the marketing aspect, helping sort of streamline some of the just manual efforts when it comes to writing marketing listings, for instance, for your properties. So those are sort of the two areas that we're playing in, and we're bringing it in a way that is more of like an AI assistant. So it fully interacts and integrates within our platform rather than sits as a separate sort of entity. Helps them do tasks directly from inside the assistant. So yeah, that's what we're playing in. Quite exciting.
That's good.
Had some really great
Yeah.
feedback so far, and especially around the accounting and financial piece.
Well, I imagine you must get some, incredibly useful data that, if it's all kind of, meshed together in an anonymized way, which I guess is what you have to do with it. Yeah, it does give you some really strong insights and guidance that you can share, with those that are using your platform, as you commented, in terms of examples there. Yeah, that people can benchmark against and get a handle on. Now, you mentioned, DIY landlords. So what is the typical sort of, DIY landlord type situations that you tend to cover?
So DIY landlord as a term is effectively any real estate investor that has residential rental properties who are self-managing those rental properties. And that covers effectively anything in the workflow, from marketing, listings, to compliance, to accounting, to all things within the sort of value chain and jobs to be done, I guess, end to end. So there's a lot of different types of jobs that a real estate investor or landlord need to do, and we provide the tools to help them do all those different things, whether it's finding tenants, to the accounting, to payments online, collecting rent, etc.
And is there a typical kind of scale for that type of landlord in terms of what they what they'll own? Or
Yeah, in the US, particularly, landlords typically have between 5 and 20 units. That's where our sweet spot is. That's where we provide the most value. 5 to 20 units is an investor that has become a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit more professional. They're trying to build a business rather than own a passive income asset. And so they typically start to structure and build it upon, or build a business upon, a tool like Landlord Studio, which helps them out with all the different things. Yeah. So
yeah,
that's who we sort of target, rather than the sort of mum and pop type investors who typically just have a side rental property.
yeah, yeah. And you talked, UK and US. Do you have a New Zealand customer base as well?
Very small. Typically, New Zealand investors will buy a rental property and then outsource it to a property manager. That's the typical workflow. And just because of how expensive property is in New Zealand, most landlords here don't have a big portfolio. Maybe one or two would be my guess at the size of the portfolio. I mean, you're looking at sort of $1 million in Auckland for a property, so quite hard to scale and build a big portfolio just with the sheer price of assets. Maybe
Yeah,
in smaller towns outside of Auckland, it's a little bit more feasible, but typically what we see here is most investors are looking for the capital gain rather than cash flow. Most investors are looking to hold on to properties and then sort of sell them after a period of time. Cash flowing rental property businesses in New Zealand are not as prevalent as they are in the UK or US.
Exciting. Oh, well, all the best with that. And, for folks that are listening, I'm wondering if you've got any roles that might suit them, or that they should mention to others. Any particular areas that you're hiring in now or expect to be over the months ahead?
Currently hiring for a product marketer. Anyone who has experience with product marketing and SaaS, particularly. Yeah, feel free to reach out to myself on LinkedIn or my email, logan@landlordstudio.com. And then anyone who has sort of experience in the accountant space and potentially in the UK as well, any help or feedback, recommendations would be greatly appreciated.
Excellent. And what's the best way for folks to get in touch, Logan?
Check out our website, landlordstudio.com. You can reach out to me directly on LinkedIn. It's where I am mostly these days. And you can also reach out to me on my email as well, logan@landlordstudio.com. So all social channels or my email be great.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, that's great. Well, thanks for the update. Really appreciate it. And of course, big thank you to our show partners, Gorilla Technology, HP, 2 Degrees, Spark, and 1NZ. Yeah, really great to have had you on the show again, Logan. Thanks for sharing your contact details and so on. Thanks everyone for joining us on this episode. Of course, make sure you are following us across the social and the streaming platforms, as well as your favorite sort of audio app, be that Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Spotify, etc. You should be able to find us through all those platforms. But of course, a lot of weeks we do also have streaming content. So well worth following us on those platforms as well. Anything else you wanted to add, Logan, before we wrap up?
I think we've covered a lot of ground today, and really appreciate you bringing me on the podcast again. It's always good to catch up. It's been great.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone. We'll catch you again on the next episode of the New Zealand Tech Podcast next week. Catch you then.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.